Indi, you ready to do this?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right. It's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Indi Safaddid-Bertarioni. Indi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right. Very excited to have you here. So Indi is a daughter. She's a sister, a wife, a mama, a friend, a human, but you can call her Indi. She lives in sunny Florida and grew up in Northwest Georgia. Her homeland is Costa Rica. She says that becoming a wife, a mother, has transformed her mind, her body, her heart, and her soul. Through these transitions, she's discovered that connection is key within herself, within others, and the world. And she says that's what she needs to do. She started a personal blog in 2022 that's expanded to a conversation platform. She started a podcast called SoulMatter, an incredible podcast about humanness, for the relational being, the curious being, and the loving being. She has the honor and privilege of having conversations with other humans, and has become a dream come true. And I'll have that, of course, linked up. Indi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
All right. So I kind of said it in the bio, but share with our listeners where you're from originally and where you are now.
Yeah, definitely. I was born in San Jose, Costa Rica, to two amazing parents, and they immigrated to the United States with, three of us in tow. I was 3 years or 4 years old. It's always a little hazy. And I ended up growing up first we went to Florida, moved up to Georgia because of family connections, and that's honestly where I grew up the majority of my life, and came down to college to Florida and stayed here in Florida, sunny South Florida.
Okay, awesome. All right, so let's dive in here. How did all this come about for you, such that we're talking today? I mean, such that you're so interested in this idea of soul, of connection, of conversation.
Yeah.
How did this come about?
Well, I've had my fair share of, what I'd consider trauma, and that definitely shaped me as a individual. And I think is what kind of sparked interest in other suffering, if that makes sense. So, from a young age, I was asking kind of bigger questions. I lost my sister when I was 7 years old. I found her drowning,
Oh my
and
God.
that was honestly one of the most, you know, pivotal points in my life, where I was left kind of devastated at such a young age, confused, left with so much wondering about why, like why does death happen?
Mm.
And from there,
How old was
I did.
she?
She was 3 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, she was a little baby, and that is just one of the things that kind of shaped my mindset, my perspective on the world. And I grew up moving a lot. We grew up kind of transplanting as immigrants. My parents just trying to make it work. And they made some incredible sacrifices. I respect them. I love them. But it definitely put, me as a young person through a lot. And I think I took a lot from that. Even though it was hard, I just was left with this unending curiosity to know. And I think I carried that through in my education. I became so excited to learn. I would devour books. I loved nonfiction, or fiction at one point, and eventually started just looking for more knowledge. I think because of my upbringing, because of those experiences that shaped me.
Okay. I want to ask you to get a little more specific here. So you said, you know, you had experienced traumas that had impacted you. And of course, your sister's experience with your sister had impacted you. How
Yeah,
did it impact you? How did it
it,
shape you?
it broke me a little. I just had this existential question of why wasn't it me? I was the older one. That day I carried I think it's natural for, in a sense, like a survivor of trauma, to wonder. So that experience in particular, outside of all the other experiences, was really one of the ones that left me wondering, what happened?
Mm-hmm.
What went wrong here? And then this desire to live out my life differently because of it. I lost her, um, kind of the aftermath of that incredibly devastating thing that happened to our family, was a catalyst for me personally to, unfortunately, rebel, question. It was always this like desire to know, why am I here? Like,
Hmm.
why was I not the one that day? I
So
felt
you're
this,
talking, you were 7,
yeah.
and at what age did this come about for you when you started to rebel, when you started to question?
Honestly, it started pretty young. I just, you know, I think it was always this nature in me to be curious. I was very shy, so I was always the observer in a lot of situations. I had a lot of challenges learning English, having come here and we only spoke Spanish at home. My parents drilled that in us. They're like, only Spanish at home. You can learn English with other peers and,
Hmm.
people outside of our home. And I think early on, I just wanted to engage and learn. And that sometimes that rebellion really did come from this deep existential place, like, why am I here? Why did I survive? Why did I have to go through what I went through? And it came into this period. I think I was, from 7, from that pivotal moment of losing her, suffering some sexual abuse as a child, and later on in life, I just started being rebellious. I was like, there's something wrong. I don't know if it was me. I had so much shame. I held on. I carried this huge burden
Mm.
of expectation that a lot of times wasn't even just my own. My parents were, um, you know, they're immigrants, so they put a lot of pressure on the eldest to perform per se. And I know they didn't
Hmm.
mean that, but I definitely had this very hard like upbringing where I felt like I have to meet their demands. I have to meet my own demands. And I started very early, wanting to be a perfectionist and then running away from that, being like, no, 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 I want to do this my way. Or,
Hmm.
if they said something, I try to do the opposite and always fail. But even from a very young age, maybe even before 7, but I think 7 is when I became more aware of the world around me and how I interacted with it. And yeah, I was a tough kid.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you sharing all that. I mean, that's a lot, an
Yeah.
incredible burden for a young kid to bear. Was there a point, or at what point in your, as a young kid, um, was there a point when you said, you know what, I need to get some help?
Oh yeah. And
What did
thankfully
that look like?
it was intervention pretty early on. I acted out a lot, and my mom especially, to share some backstory on her, she struggled with mental health. Her mother struggled with mental health. That experience broke her, and I showed up for her as best as I could. And then she showed up for me and recognized, you need help. We need help.
Hmm.
So it was churches, it was eventually a therapist, like lines of therapists. I can remember just going from a therapist room to another at times in
Mm.
seasons where I was struggling. Um, and that really was incredible. I can remember distinctly some of those experiences being me like, I don't want to be here. I don't want to talk to you. I remember once yelling at the therapist, I think I was like 10, I hate you. And she was like, okay. She knew it was not personal, but
Hmm.
yeah, it was a lot of that. I did thankfully in moments of really tough like reactions from my end. I remember, others, pointing me to help.
Hmm.
And that kind of also was that idea of like, oh, I don't like therapists. And then I ended up, pursuing that. So I'm thankful for those people who showed up with this angry, angry girl in that room and just were there. Like they just sat there and let me take it out on them. And my parents, they did the best they could under the circumstances with the anger and the shame, everything I was carrying. So yeah, thankfully I
What
had that help.
what did you learn? I mean, what are some of your takeaways now, having studied therapy as a therapist, looking back on your own experience as a client in that room? What were some of the things that some of the therapists did that maybe helped you or
Mm.
shifted things for you?
Um, well, from where I was more aware, of what was happening, I quickly became, like I said, the observer in situations like that where I was like, I'm not budging, I'm not going to talk to you, or lashing out at some point when they triggered, they found out a way to get me to open up, was their persistence, just showing up. Like sometimes I could tell the difference between someone who really wanted to be there and others who were just like, oh, I'm getting paid to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And, you could kind of see it behind the glimmer in their eye or like their body, mannerisms and body language that they were having a hard time. But those that were just there, there's one in particular, Mrs. Higgins, who, oh my God, I remember resisting it so much at first, but that therapeutic relationship was key for me. I
Mm.
remember I had never cried that much in my life. I was never allowed to cry. I never allowed myself to cry. I sobbed from this deep, deep hole in my soul and
Mm.
like just let it all out. And she just sat there. And it felt uncomfortable at first because I'm like, you're just gonna sit here and watch me cry.
How old were
I
you at
was
that point?
I was, I think, 13, 14,
Well,
and I kept going there until I was like, yeah, 14 or 15. So 3-year relationship.
what was it about her that helped create that relationship?
I could sense the love. I could sense she loved doing that and
Wow.
being there. And towards the end, I knew she loved me. Like she had grown to just care. Like she deeply
Mm.
cared about me. And it's funny because at one point, one of my struggles with therapy is like the blurring of the lines, at least for me when I was practicing, of, going from I'm here to support you in this time of vulnerability to like, I want to be a part of your life or I want to,
Mm-hmm.
extend a helping hand. And she just balanced that beautifully. I never
Mm.
felt infringed upon outside of those therapy sessions. She never once, betrayed my trust. Because that was a big thing growing up. I felt like anything I said to this therapist was going to get back to someone. So there's a lot of fear. There was no fear in that room. It was just incredible the amount of love I felt, in those moments where she was just there. She was
Wow.
listening. Yeah.
Wow. That's awesome. So
Yeah.
let's jump ahead to
Mhm.
your podcast and even the blogs. Things started out. Talk to us about how that came about.
I mentioned, becoming a wife and, willingly choosing that because at one point in my life, I was like, I'm never going to get married. That's ridiculous. Like jaded about marriage. And I met Angel and things changed. So that was a huge transition for me. I went from hiding a lot. I think I always hid behind my performance in school and activities. And I was always afraid to just be myself. So when I married Angel, that kind of just went out the window.
Mm.
There was this courage within me, within him to just be ourselves. And I felt seen, I felt known. And that carried on to us, deciding to start a family. And it was hard. I just I have to say the whole transition period in the last 6 years has been hard for me. I
In what
felt
way?
I just felt selfish. Like, was I supposed to do this? Like I wanted something for myself. And it felt, in a way I was giving, like willingly, of course, at times consciously. And then other times I'm like, is this what I wanted? And I constantly, center myself again and ground myself and recognize I do want this. And I want to work hard for it. I don't think this happened by chance. So it's been that transition. I wrote a lot as a kid and I was nervous to ever share it with anyone. I was like, I don't know if this is any good. And the blog came out of that place of like, hey, I think I'm going to share my thoughts with the world. And it was scary. And then it transitioned into, wanting to have a presence out there for others to feel comfortable to do the same. I when someone finds my blog or happens on anything I put out there, I just want them to feel welcome to do the same, to know me and kind of an invitation for me to know them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's driving me. I think that's what I found so alluring about the field of mental health and still do. I'm passionate about that human piece in this world. Like we're just connecting, we're talking, you're
Mm-hmm.
listening, I'm listening, and we're reflecting on those innermost thoughts. We don't just share our thoughts with almost anybody, but I felt comfortable to do it. I needed to do it. I felt like I just had to start writing. And it evolved into wanting to have a podcast, and just happenstance finding your workshop here last year and thinking, whoa, like Guy McPherson's doing this. And I had been listening to your voice for a period of, since graduate school in 2016. And I went for it. And honestly, you inspired me so much that I was like, I found this courage within me to do the same thing what Guy has been doing. And that's where I'm at, essentially, I think where it came to fruition to
Hmm.
do it.
I appreciate you saying that. When we first talked, and when I heard you talk, you have this just clear passion and love for, like you said, needing to connect with people, and you can feel it. And how do you like put that into a podcast? What are your thoughts on doing that?
I think I want to just hear stories. That's that's a cultural thing maybe, and also maybe just a human thing to want to hear stories. I like knowing people. I just like meeting them, talking to them. I could talk to a stranger anywhere. And the big reason I love traveling is because you happen to do that. It feels normal to just talk to a random strangers sitting next to you on their way to the next destination. I think have compassion for people. I just want to know and care the way I think I have been known and cared for. I want to give it back almost. And it's intentional. I think I've recognized, like, I need to do this. I want to do this, and I will do this. So
Mhm.
yeah, I need to do it. So there's
So
that.
talk more, kind of unpack that need to do this. Why do you need to do this?
Mhm. I think I feel called to it. There's something so incredible about the curious imagination. I used to think like, oh, maybe I'm so intuitive, or I don't want to use the word necessarily just intuitive, but I'm so curious for a reason. And from some of the conversations over time with people that matter to me, and some of the experiences that I've shared or have heard reflected back to me, shared with me, those narratives are kind of maybe what shaped me and propel me towards this. I I just want to get it out there. Like anytime there's something special to share about someone, it could be
Hmm.
silly, it could sound like a silly story to them, but I've seen that specific story like transform myself. It's impacted me, like
Hmm.
just hearing about it. And kind of keeping like this mental track of, wow, these people, it's kind of creepy, but I keep a list of people I've met. And I keep their names because their names matter to me now. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna think of this person and just, remember this or that keynote about them. I did it when I was a therapist. I think it helped me stay organized with what client I was sitting with and the interactions. And it carried on into this, sounds creepy, but this list of people I care about. And
Hmm.
I think that's special. I think it was done for me at some point to want to do that for other people, to just listen. I think I'm very relational. I always have been, and I've hidden behind not, hidden behind the fear of doing that. Like I
Hmm.
didn't want to do that. I was like, why am I so like, why do I care so much about people? I kind
Hmm.
of wondered where that was coming from, and I finally recognized, there's something with death and life when you've seen it. I think that changes you, especially if it's someone you loved.
Well, that kind of connects to what I want to ask you now, which is, I mean, when you look back to yourself as a 7-year old and having that experience, and jump forward to where you are now and what you're
Mhm.
doing, is there a connection there?
Yeah,
Uh,
I think
what is
so.
that?
Well, my sister Paola, she was 3 years old, and she was the 4th born to my mother, and she just could talk to anybody. It was almost annoying because we always knew, like, if we couldn't find her, she was talking to someone, and she was 3 years old, and I remember that inquisitive nature in her. For 3 years, she left a huge impact in our lives. It was a
Mhm.
huge hole. And her leaving this earth, like her death, just it left a hole big enough to the grief was overwhelming. in our family. People who'd met her just once were like, "What? Like, she's gone?" And that funeral was one of the hardest things I've ever been to, and it stuck with me. I think it stuck with me. It's been something that I, like, mentioned, I've just been so afraid to lose people. I think there's this fear in me to, like, lose someone,
Mhm.
a fear of abandonment, from different other things that have happened, and that I think is key in wanting to know people. I think that has propelled me to, like, just I want to know you. Like, if I met you, I think there's a reason for that, and it's special. I wanna nurture it. I want to connect with you and even connect you to someone else that might connect with you. I wanna share your story. I wanna listen to that story. And it's a sacred space I've experienced as someone in the seat per se,
Mhm.
and that I think I've, managed to host that space for others, and I think it's important.
That word sacred, I mean, that phrase sacred space jumps out to me because that's kind of what I felt when I first talked to you and you started talking about this. It was like I felt to myself, my God, this woman is like serious about this. She's passionate about this. It's not just, oh, I'm going to do this. It's like I need to do this. And I felt the power of your need to that curiosity and that almost that honoring of people's stories. And I think it even resonates for me more strongly because it's almost antithetical to our culture now where we're not taking the time
Yeah.
to hear people's to engage with people, and yet you're creating this amazing space to do just that.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope that that's my intention moving forward is doing just that. It's hard to see the social narrative at times with others sharing their struggles. I've experienced it myself, maybe where you put something out there and you feel like it's received with radio silence, but it's on the web. It's on like this whatever, the internet is. And there may or may not be someone who resonates with it, but when you do it in person or foster like the garden in person with someone, it's beautiful. I want to bring that out there because I think there has been like a loss of ourselves online versus ourselves in person, and it's
Hmm.
hard to be authentic at times in person. It's really hard.
Hmm.
So imagine behind the screen, like you can obviously just say whatever you want. It may or may not hurt or, be a compassionate thing to share with other people. Um, but that connection, like that witness to someone and their story, if they decide to share that, that is what is key. Like I hope excuse me, that is what gets across. If I do share something or invite someone into that opportunity, I think that's important. And I'm excited to see what happens with open authenticity. I've been following along and seeing the dates you have there. I think in the therapist field, there's a lack of community at times, like a lack of connection even between therapists. I felt that at least that was my experience, when I was in graduate school and deciding whether or not to, consider licensure. So I hope that can be healing for someone. That's my goal, is that it can be healing. I think I had a lot of inner work that I needed to do,
Hmm.
and I'm doing it. It sucks. It really is not fun, but it's worth it because I think that awareness is key in being there for other people.
What about it sucks when you say it's the inner work sucks? What are you talking about specifically?
I I voided and denied there was something more, and I think the spectrum of trauma for any person, I think sometimes can be like, oh yeah, that happened. And what about it, Or for me right now, I'm in this space where I'm like, "Oh my goodness, I'd never faced that." Like, I
Hmm.
just said it happened. I remember sharing times, like, at times with someone, like, this really scary piece of information and just watching a reaction and being like, "Ugh, that's why I don't tell people that," That's why I don't share that. I'm scared to share it. I felt so vulnerable. Like, I hate crying. I'm not someone who enjoys crying, but that inner work has been a lot of crying. It has been a lot of anger, like, that comes up, and I was like, "I thought that was resolved. Why am I still angry? What's underneath that
Hmm.
anger?" And, like, exploring that, and it's been helping me just prune the bias, prune the fears, prune like the triggers for me as a person in relation with other people, not just in counseling, but definitely in just connection with people. Like I see when I do that, it's hard for me, but I know it invites someone else to do it, you know? Like, oh, this is not easy, but if you do it, you're gonna feel almost free. Like after, you're gonna feel this, whoa, like it just changes things. I felt like it's transformed me a little bit going through this growing pain and self-awareness process and inner work healing journey, and it's been good, but it's hard.
I think what you're doing with your podcast, SoulMatter, you're creating a space for people to share very intensely, and it's obviously, and I'm sure you know this, is going to be very impactful on you. Because similarly for me, I wasn't expecting how much I was going to be impacted and even challenged to, even be more vulnerable and be myself more. I wasn't expecting that, but I think you're even more overtly doing that in your podcast. And I think it's going to be really inspiring for the listener and also for yourself too. Get ready.
I'm trying. Thank you.
So let me just remind everyone, I'm speaking with Indi, Safaddid-Bertarioni. The podcast is called SoulMatter. And now you also got a group, correct? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah,
Soul
I'd love
Narrative?
to.
Okay. What's going on with that?
It's new. It's something I've been working on. I think I wanted to coincide them, doing SoulMatter, Soul Narrative, and it's really an open invitation right now. I want to get specific and just start like email listing specific people and be like, hey, do you want to do this? But it comes from this place of having done something called Story Group. And that changed me. Like literally, that was the first time ever in a church, for example, that I spoke about my feelings and it was welcomed. It was this deep, deep dive into like, what happened? What's going on with you? Let's talk about what your needs are, what your desires are. And that's where this is coming from, honestly, from an inspiration of working through a lot of my own stuff and wanting to do that for others. So it will be small. I think I'm welcoming 5 people at most for now while I grow into it, to host this curious space, this open space to just talk. I will be inviting people to share specific stories about themselves. And there's no fixing. No fixing allowed. No one's allowed to turn into a therapist in those moments. And just, I want people to feel heard. I want them to feel valued because they do value. They do bring value to this world. So that's what that is. It's going to be small, open invitation to anyone interested. I try to make contacting me as easy as possible if there's interest out there. And I do welcome, people of all journeys and walks. I think maybe over time it might need to become more specific, but I think right now there's just this willingness to just listen and be there. And like you mentioned, that might transform me too a little bit. It might impact me.
Of course it will. Yeah. I think when you're doing something like that and being as open as you are and vulnerable as you are willing to be, you cannot help but be impacted by that. So, all right, Indi, what's the best way for people to get in contact with you to learn about your podcast and Soul Narrative Group?
Definitely welcome to find me on Facebook or Instagram. My website, it all interconnects. So whatever you're more comfortable using, you're welcome to use that. The website's there just to, kind of be the go-to. So that's unfortunately right now the domain's not set up, but it's accessible through my Instagram, my Facebook, and I will respond through any medium you decide to reach out.
Okay.
Email, direct
and
message.
I'll have it linked up here on the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Once again, Indi's podcast is called SoulMatter and her group is called Soul Narrative. Awesome. Super inspiring. Love to have you back. We can keep up to date and see how things are going. Thank you so much.
That'd be amazing. Thank you.
All
Thank
right,
you for
Indi,
this.
take care.
You too.